Imagine yourself at high noon in the square of a large city, and you're about to witness the unveiling of Picasso's last great sculpture. Crowds have been gathering. The newspapers have been doing a large number on it for a large time. There's a group of court reporters sitting on the portico of the courthouse. Photographic Society has cameras stationed all the way around the square. Many people have come from art classes, and at last the dedication ceremonies began. Speeches began to the citizens who have made possible this sculpture, this square, and finally the scaffolding drops, the crowd gets quiet, and everyone has a look at this really beautiful piece of art. Now, what one sees depends on where one stands. Where in the particular place, whether you're up high, down low, where you stand. What you see also depends on who you are. Are you an art critic? Are you a photographic critic? Are you interested mostly in writing a letter home to mother, telling her about this very special day? What is your point of view? Who are you? Where do you stand? And what is your mode of communication about what it is that you experienced? And so as we take this metaphor of watching the grand unveiling of a large three-dimensional sculpture, and we imagine that during the course of time, the sun changes the sculpture itself. By the time the moon comes out, the moon passes over, the shadows change it. So with the passing of time, with perspective, with who you are, with how you might want to communicate to someone else, all of what you see and what you experience changes. And of course, those of you who have done your homework now in physics, quantum physics, you're aware that we now look at the universe from a number of different vantage points. Applying this metaphor to psychology, to psychotherapy, the question still is, with each of us who's a therapist, who are we? That gives us a certain perspective, a certain vantage point on what we listen to. What is our particular vantage point? Through what lens are we looking at what we hear? And if we're going to try to talk to other people about it, what are the theories? What are the words? What are the symbols that we use in order to try to communicate? And so we become aware that our ideas may be stemming from 17th century, from Newton, and 19th century science, that there is a certain thing called the human being and a certain idea called the mind, and we can now look at the mind objectively and study it objectively. These are myths of the past. We're now aware, post-Einstein, post-quantum physics, post-chaos theory, that who we are, where we stand, what tools we use to observe, what tools and concepts we use to communicate determine what the beast is that we're looking at. And so today, in the course of the day, I want to try to introduce you to some contemporary ways that psychoanalysts have come to listen to people, and to the theme that has sort of characterized my work for 2 decades, listening perspectives, the idea being that over time we have evolved a series of different perspectives, different vantage points, different ways to look and to listen to the people that come to our consulting room. So in the course of the day, I'd like to this morning review briefly something of the philosophy of science behind the way we look and listen in psychotherapy today. Then I'd like to move to the 4 different developmental listening perspectives that have been defined so far. And then the bulk of today is going to be some lengthy, in-depth cases. And I think some of you today were looking forward to that, in that I know a number of you have either read my books or been at other presentations, so you know the basic take on science that I have. But the question is, how do we begin to apply that? So there will be several short cases we'll look at, and 3 long cases in the course of the day. And the 3 cases that we're going to look at in depth are cases which we might say are dealing with lower level, that is developmentally earlier, developmental arrests, so that they are going to be more in the what's called the borderline or the psychotic range of development, and how some of the transference and countertransference aspects can be worked with. So we've got a long day, a lot of things to cover. It's fairly intense, but where I think I want to start and begin to focus you on is that it is important to begin to think in terms of these 4 different angles from which we might listen to anybody that comes to our consulting room. And so the 4 different angles I'm going to go through in a bit of detail. So the question then is, why listening perspectives? The philosophy behind it really comes from Ludwig Wittgenstein. His comment is this: the general form of propositions is, this is how things are. That is, since time immemorial, we look at something and say, aha, this is the truth, this is reality, this is the mind, this person is this kind of a person or that person. Our DSM is fond of saying this is a narcissist, this is borderline, this person is bipolar. So there is a general way of speaking that says this is the way things are. That's the kind of proposition that one repeats to oneself countless times. One thinks that one is tracing the outline of the thing's nature, a real hysteric, a real borderline, over and over again. But one is merely tracing around the frame through which we look at it. And that's really, I think, the philosophical underpinning that all of science is moving to today, realizing that it is our frame for perception that determines what we see, and what then are going to be the most useful frames that we know of at this point in time to conceptualize our clinical and theoretical work. Why listening perspectives? This is the forecast for this morning. First thing I want to do is to look at the paradigm shift in psychoanalysis. That is, what are the features that really characterize the way we look and listen to clinical work today. Then we will look at the 4 listening perspectives as they've evolved over a century. Then we'll talk about the origins of countertransference and a little bit about the first case of analysis, Anna O. And then we're going to look at the varieties of countertransference. One of the features that I think strikes us most about modern clinical work is more than ever we are paying attention to our countertransference. We know that we are a person in the room with a real background, a real history, with real feelings, and that particular reality that we take in the room determines what it is we see, hear, and how we respond. So the countertransference has become increasingly important. So we'll talk about the varieties of countertransference, and then particularly the kind of countertransference that we have to organizing level or the earliest level of mental development. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we can do some interpretation of the countertransference, and then we'll take a break. And after the break, we'll look at the case of Dora, which is a case that I treated some years ago in which there was an erotic transference that posed some countertransference problems for me, and I'll be showing you how I blew the case completely.